Okay, good. We're streaming now, right?
Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you and welcome everyone to the Wednesday, May 20th meeting of the Albany Common Council's Public Safety Committee. My name is Kelly Kimbrough. I'm the chair of the committee and the fourth ward council member. Present committee members are Ballerin, Councilmember Ballerin, Hoey, and Councilmember Frederick. From the committee, along with council members Farrell, Fahey, Flynn, Love, and I believe that's it, and Conti. Are also participating in the meeting. We have our staff, City Clerk Danielle Gillespie, Legislative Aide Michelle Andre, and our Research Council, J.R. Pichardo. Thank you for being
and
here,
I'm not
Chief.
staff, but I'm here.
No, oh, you're on the. Sorry, buddy. You're on the bottom, and you're covered by the admit from the waiting room, so I couldn't see you. And
what,
council,
thank you.
I couldn't see it. No, you're there. You were just underneath the pop-up.
Gotcha. Thank you, sir.
Along with Council President Corey Ellis and Ms. Fredericks. Councilmember Fredericks is also with us. Thank you, Chief, for being here. We'll get right to it. The topic of discussion will be we're looking for updates on gun violence, the police department's response to calls for service during this New York on pause. We'd also like to discuss concerns over barbecues and fire pits during the upcoming months, along with a few other issues such as fireworks and whatnot. Members will have questions along those lines. There will be public comment. There is currently only one. It's written, and when we get to public comment, we'll put it up on the screen and I'll read it for that public comment. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Chief Hawkins.
All right, thank you, Chair, and good evening to all of the members of council and the staff as well. And I think a good place to start is where we were at the beginning of the year, pre-COVID, what happened during COVID, and what we're looking at right now, and what we anticipate seeing during the summer months and going into the fall. And early this year, somewhere around mid to late January, we started to see a spike, a very unusual spike in shootings in the city. As well as other violence. And it was something that caught the police department off guard. A lot of our veteran detectives were caught off guard with this. It was very unusual what we're seeing. And once we figured out what was actually happening, we saw that these were some disputes, just like a lot of disputes that we see and a lot of violence that we see. It was a small group of individuals who were responsible for a large amount of violence that we were seeing in the community. We identified who these groups of individuals were, what the source of the feuds were, and we put some strategies in place to address that, and we did. We started to make some arrests. We started to take some people off the street. We started to confiscate some weapons. And after that spike, and this was pre-COVID, we started to see that our activity levels in the city started to settle back and go back to where we typically were at that time of year. And then COVID hit. And after COVID, it presented a number of challenges for us. And one of the main challenges is that because of the uncertainty with the virus, we had to change our strategy in terms of our interaction with the community. And this is something that was happening nationwide. Police departments nationwide changed their strategies in terms of how we deployed our officers, what our strategies were, and we adopted strategies that limited contact with the public in order to protect officers, but also members of the public as well. And there were fewer proactive type activities by officers, and so that it left a void almost. And so what we saw nationwide in the discussions we were having in our with our professional groups nationwide is that there was a dramatic and sudden increase and particularly gun violence in urban cities across America. What was consistent across the board was that we were seeing decreases in property crimes. In general, we were seeing decreases in crime overall. And we started to consistently, we were seeing these increases in communities with domestic violence, with motor vehicle related crimes. And in particular, and the one that was very, very disturbing to all of us was this increase in firearms related crimes. And we theorized, and we still do, that the reason we saw that spike, that very unusual and unanticipated spike, was because there was this void now on our streets. There were fewer people on the streets because of social distancing and stay-at-home orders in communities across America. There were fewer officers who were out and about because we had to social distance. We had to minimize contact with the public to protect everybody because of the uncertainty at that time. Nobody knew really what was happening. Nobody knew how, with the chances of infection and amongst officers and amongst members of the community and in general. And so we had all that uncertainty that was happening. And some of these individuals in our communities saw this void, and they exploited this void. They saw fewer people on the street. They saw fewer police officers, and now these feuds and these conflicts that we were seeing that existed prior to COVID were now exploding in our streets, and it was manifesting itself with gun violence. And so during this period of time, during COVID, from March 1st until the report that I have here that was that ended May 18th, we experienced 193% increase in confirmed shots fired. Shootings were more than double. Shooting victims more than double. Our firearms recoveries were up. Our gun arrests were down. And those numbers were fairly consistent with what we're seeing in communities across America. And so we had to adjust, and we had to figure all this out. And first thing we had to do was figure out, how can we do this safely? How can we continue to police our communities and address this threat without exposing members of the community and exposing our officers to unnecessarily to this virus? And we acquired enough PPE. We had some partnerships with the private sector and with other organizations in order to provide sanitizing and disinfecting on a regular basis with our police vehicles and in our workspaces. We got sanitizer and all the things that we needed to keep those officers safe, so they felt safe and that they can actually go out there and do some more proactive things and mitigate their risk. And it took us a couple of weeks to get those things in place and to adjust our strategies. And we've done that. And so over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've taken some officers out of patrol and placed them into a specialized unit that it's their responsibility and their duty to go out and address some of the hotspots that we have in our city and address some of the violence that we were seeing. And since that unit has been out there over these last 2 or 3 weeks, they've made a number of very, very impressive catches and addressing a lot of the stuff that we were seeing. There's been a number of arrests. There's been a number of gun recoveries. We're sending the message now that, the police are back. They're out there. A lot of this stuff where they felt that they can go out there with impunity and fire off 25 or 30 rounds at a time and not see a police officer until we responded, not see anybody, not see any witnesses. Those days are over right now. We've made some adjustments. We're back out, and we've seen some tremendous progress. And we're starting to see now our numbers trending back to normal levels at this point. And so we had some challenges at first. addressed those challenges. COVID came, presented some new challenges. We adjusted, and now we're back to business and handling these things in our community. Now, going forward, we're obviously heading into our summer months where we see more activity. And we're going back to some of the strategies that worked for us in the past. And that's making sure that we have our officers out there proactively working with the community. We've got our beat officers out there now that are still very, very active. We've got specialized units that'll be working throughout the summer. We're working with our partners at all levels of law enforcement, federal, state, and county, as well as some of our locals that we're partnering with. We've had officers that are assigned to federal task forces in order to give us intelligence for some activities that may be coming from out state, and to give us some resources and intelligence from the federal government in dealing with a lot of these sorts of things. And I'm very, very optimistic as we move forward that we've got the pieces in place now. We have the resources, we've got the intelligence, we've got a plan in place to address what we're going to see moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Chief. So what we'll do is beginning with committee members, begin with questions. Any committee member have any questions or comments for the Chief?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Ballerin?
Okay, thank you. I had a question about well, first and foremost, thank you for joining us. With the summer months coming, you know, and the uptick in violence that we see, do you feel that you have the adequate force to be able to address the issues that we may face? And if you don't, what are the resources do you think you can tap into, such as, I know one year we had state support and other agencies come in and give us some additional manpower. That's my first question, and I'll let the rest. I'm sure everyone else has other questions that I'd like to touch on, but I'll start with that one.
Yeah, so Councilman, I think we have the resources, and I think we have a great plan to address what needs to be done this summer. But of course, I mean, right now we're 56 officers short and about to be 57 officers short because we're just found out today that we're losing another one. And so it would be nice to be close to full staff or at full staffing levels. But despite that, I think we're still in a good place to address what needs to happen. One thing that's worked in our favor is that we haven't had the festivals that we've had in prior years, and looks like we won't have them in the very near future. So I haven't had officers that are being mandated or forced to work a lot of these different details and then have to backfill their positions, and just this cycle of officers now that are being overworked as a result of that. And that could have presented a number of challenges if this would have been a normal summer. But even so without that challenge, I think we can still do what we need to do despite being 56 officers short. But you're asking, you know, is there something that could help? Then I think certainly having more officers would be something that would be helpful. But again, despite that, we can do what needs to be done.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And also, just to answer your other question about the state police and other agencies that may be able to help us, we still have a partnership with the state police. They pulled their officers out of that detail for the moment because of challenges that they're facing with COVID-19, and we're looking to reinstate that partnership where they have an officer periodically riding with our officers.
Chief, I have a question for you, just to follow up on did we ever consider a collaboration with the county?
in terms of the county assisting us with some things, law enforcement related things in the community?
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, like, you know, we hearing shortage, you know, for the last 2 or 3 years, we're hearing shortages, and I'm just asking if it was ever any consideration to a joint venture with the county, with Sheriff Apple, maybe sending some men down to assist you. Or
We do have a partnership with the county, not with having their officers policing the city, but we have, when there are certain issues or incidents that are happening in the community where we have some mutual interests, or if we simply need some assistance with some of those things on a case-by-case basis, we do that. But no, we haven't in terms of having them police the city. One of the things that is that's a challenge is that they're having some of the same challenges in terms of staffing and prioritizing their law enforcement capabilities and things like that as well. And the other thing also is I'm reluctant to have officers from another agency from outside the city policing our city unless it's absolutely necessary, because I'm not confident that those officers have the community-oriented focus that our officers have. I think that it opens up a possibility of there being misunderstandings in terms of interactions between police and members of the community when you have officers who aren't from here, haven't been trained here, don't know the community, and they're just coming in and they're policing. I think we got to be very, very careful with that. I wouldn't rule out the possibility if things got bad enough and it was an absolute necessity to have that happen, but it would have to be an absolute last resort from my perspective.
Okay.
And a follow-up question. When was the last time that our department operated on a full staff? Does anyone know the answer to that question?
Well, it certainly hasn't been since my time here. I think when I was appointed, I want to say we were 20 or 30 officers short, and maybe even more. I'll get that exact number, but it was a substantial number short. But here's the thing. This is why I'm optimistic going forward, is because we have a plan for, and this may be for the first time in a while. Like I said, certainly since my time and in the immediately before I got here, we have a plan in place to get this police department fully staffed very, very soon. Prior to the challenges that COVID has presented, we had a plan, and we had the facility, we had the numbers of recruits, we had everything in place to have a recruit class next month of between 40 and 50 officers or recruits, enough to pretty much fill the void that we have in terms of vacancies in the police department. And those that we did not fill, the plan was to pick up those in the next academy class at the beginning of 2021. Now, and this is probably a question that was going to come up anyway. Now, because of some of the budgetary challenges presented by COVID, we're limited to having 30 recruits in our next class, which is again tentatively scheduled for June 15th. It's better than nothing. And and when you consider what's happening in a lot of other places around here, around this region and around the country, it's actually a very, very good thing that we're actually hiring those many officers and not staying where we are or even laying off like some other places are doing. But despite that, despite having fewer officers that we planned on having this time, we still have a plan in place that will happen, where we're going to have this department fully staffed we're going to have the numbers anyway by the beginning of 2021, because we're going to get these 30 in right now. Next month, we will have a recruit class of 30 recruits. And again, we could have had more. We have the capabilities of having 45 to 50. We'll have 30 now, and we'll get them through. And we may lose 2 or 3 in the academy. That's usually the attrition rate in these academies. So 30 go through, we may have 27 or 28 who make it out. We'll have another class that we'll hold in late January of 2021. And we'll have the capabilities at that point. I'm assuming that some of these budgetary challenges will have settled, and we'll have a full class to pick up all of the vacancies that are left over. And for the first time, and probably many, and I don't know, Kelly can maybe answer this one, because I don't know if they were even fully staffed during the time when he was here. So for the first time in a long time, we'll have this department fully staffed with a plan in place to maintain full staffing in this department for the years to come.
Thank you, Chief. So on the staffing, for my 22 years there, we always ran 10 to 15 officers short of full authorized strength. Mr. Hoey and then Ms. Frederick.
Hi, Chief. It's good
Hi.
to see you, even though it's on video, but at least we see you there. We know that you've been working hard. I had a couple of questions. On the staffing, one thought came to mind. There are other communities around here laying off. Is that an opportunity for us to hire? I don't know, would they have to be retrained or not? And my other question is, with the rise in gun violence, when I was reading the paper about some of the incidents, and Troy seemed to pop out, could some of this stuff be, is there like gang warfare going on between Albany and Troy? I know in the past that's come up, but is that, or is it just like the COVID problem where people are just like all housed in and, getting their frustrations out, shooting off a gun?
Yeah, so to take your second one, yes, what we have found is that just like in other cases, and first of all, we've identified these individuals who were involved in the violence. We know who they are. We've made a number of arrests already, and those who we haven't arrested, they will be arrested soon. We'll be closing those cases out. And we know what the source of the violence was. And in some cases, there was some Troy and Albany nexus. Schenectady was involved in some of the other stuff, but in most of the cases, it involves just what we've seen over and over and over again. Groups of individuals who had some sort of conflict that allowed it to escalate, and then all of a sudden it rose to the sort of violence that we were seeing. When we peel back the layers to all this stuff, it's starting over a social media post where somebody felt offended. In one case, it was a person whose house was broken into, and when he went to address it with the people who broke into the house, they disrespected him, and therefore he wanted retribution. And it just so happened that he saw these individuals on the street. It just so happened they were down at Madison and Grand in this case, just so happened to see him there by happenstance. They're at the corner, and he decided to get his retribution for this burglary at his house at that time. You had some where there was a feud over somebody whose dog attacked somebody else, and they shot at the dog, and this ignited this feud that resulted in 2 or 3 incidents of gunfire. And it's on and on. So it's all of those. That's the source of every single one, is this kind of feud or conflict among 1 or 2 or a group of individuals, and we had to sort it out to figure out what it was. In a lot of cases, what makes it so difficult for us with this is that it's spontaneous. In a lot of cases, it just erupts out of nowhere. Like I say, when you got somebody who gets disrespected over social media, I mean, it's hard to predict it or anticipate that from a law enforcement perspective. So in a lot of cases, we find ourselves reacting to a lot of the violence in cases like that. But to answer your question, yes, we know what the source is. It's identifiable sources. We know who they are and why they're doing it. We've made a number of arrests. We've made a number of recoveries of firearms. Those who we haven't gotten yet, we will be getting them fairly soon. And in terms of layoffs and from other departments and opportunities, absolutely. We're already looking. In fact, we've got officers from other departments now who've been reaching out to us. We've got 3 or 4 already who are saying that they want to come to Albany, and we're entertaining that possibility. And what makes it beneficial for us is exactly what you said. We don't have to train them. and then come right in. We can put them into a training program just to get them acclimated to the Albany way, and they can start serving. Now, there's always a possibility that they'll go back to their departments. There's no secret that some of these surrounding departments make more money than Albany police officers make. And there's a possibility we could, because they get laid off at some of these other departments, that we could take them on, and once the pressures are relieved in their former agencies, that they may go back. But that's fine too. If that happens, it gives us some temporary relief in the short term, and it gives us an opportunity to get our academies back filled up and to fill those gaps.
Okay, Ms. Frederick, Mr. Conti, and then Ms. Fahey.
Hi, Chief. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Quick question regarding the upcoming Memorial Day weekend. Do you have any plans for increased coverage or additional measures being taken to ensure that people are social distancing and being safe?
Yeah, we're going to be doing a number of public safety announcements and working with the media just to encourage people to adhere to the governor's executive orders regarding the social distancing and some of the restrictions on large gatherings and things like that, encouraging people to go to the state's website to get more information about what is permissible and what is restricted. And we are going to have some extra officers out in the community during this weekend. We'll have our normal cadre of officers, but we're going to have some specialized units that we have that have been working. They'll be out this weekend, and we're also going to pull some other officers out to kind of make sure that we have some visibility and the ability to deal with any other spikes in activity that may occur. So I'm fairly confident that we're prepared. I mean, this doesn't mean obviously that nothing will happen, because obviously sometimes things spontaneously happen, but we're prepared. We have an idea of what some of the challenges are and where to deploy our people to minimize the chances of some of this stuff happening. And if things do happen, we have a plan in place to quickly and effectively address those things.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Conti?
Thanks, and thank you, Chief. I also was listening last night on the ACPAC forum, and I did raise a couple of questions. I appreciate the answers. But let me make some observations, just some concerns that I have in terms of the ability, staffing levels, and ability to provide the coverage. Because I think this is, the first summer, in effect, where we're going to be dealing with what I see as a reduction in the availability of beat officers because of the reorganization. I'm still not sure how that beat patrol coordination is going to work when you have really expanded the beats and all that. So I am concerned about how that might operate. But also, being down 57 officers, which is actually a larger number than we've been hearing, you have in effect, and prior to your coming on, but the department's been operating with, in effect, what is like a 17-18% cut in your staffing or in your budget, you might say. So you've been carrying, a heavy burden for a while, and with stretched resources, et cetera. My concern is, in terms of the class you're going to be taking in, which originally was going to be a larger class, a 40 to 50, and is now pared down to 30. And I forget how long the training is before they actually are able to hit the streets. But what's the possibility or probability that we do the class of 30, they're trained, they go out. By the time they're out, you're confronted with additional retirements that may well put us back where we are today, or maybe even in a worse situation, because it's hard to project the retirement levels. You know who's going to retire. You don't always know if they're going to take retirement, but that number is out there. And I'm just wondering, what is the possibility that we might just be back where we are today, even though you have a new class coming in?
Yeah, I think that there's a very good possibility that may happen, Rich. And that kind of ties into your concerns about the beat officers and the expanded boundaries that these beat officers have. Because in order to have a sustainable structure that won't or that will minimize the chances of this happening again in the future, we had to make some sacrifices in terms of some of the assignments that we had. And one of the things that we did was to reduce the size of our NEU unit, in particular with our beat officers, in order to give us some more support in the patrol side, so that we have some flexibility when we have times of stress in terms of some of these officers leaving. And so this structure that we have in place, once we eventually get these positions filled, and we're going to get them filled, it's going to set us back, frankly, another 6 months in order from where I was projecting we were going to be, by having fewer officers in this class right now. It'll set us back, but we will get there. And once we get there, we will have a sustainable model that will minimize the chances of this happening again in the future. But also what it's going to do, and this question came up last night during the Facebook forum, it's going to allow, and in fact, I think Alfredo asked this question, this is going to allow us to incorporate those regular patrol officers into our beat officer concept. So in fact, those beat officers, once we eventually get to be fully staffed, they're going to have more support than they ever had. They're going to have more resources. They've already had some training that they hadn't had before. Those beat officers, despite having fewer of them and having larger geographic areas, are going to be even more impactful than they ever have been. We've got to wait for this model to actually get fully implemented. And we just haven't, because of circumstances, had a chance to do it. And again, it's going to set us back a little while in order to get that. But we'll get there. And you're right. I think right now we have 60 or so officers that are eligible to retire. Clearly,
That's a lot.
I mean, I don't think it's, I mean, we're not going to have 60 leave, but I mean, it's reasonable that we could have, a half dozen or more that decide they want to leave during this year. And you're right, it could set us back. We'll absorb and we'll maintain. And because the people in the department know that in the community, we've got a plan in place to make sure that we get these filled, and that we're not in this position again anytime in the future.
Because one of the things I'm seeing, I mean, one of the issues out there obviously is the violent crime and gunfire, et cetera. But I'm also seeing more, quality of life issues, which beat officers are well equipped to deal with because they're out on the streets, they're available. And, just concerned about that as we move into the summer, and with a lot of things closed down, less activities, trying to deal with some of those issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we move out of COVID and we're getting more comfortable dealing with COVID from a health perspective, both with our officers and with members of the community, our officers are now becoming a lot more proactive in dealing with these quality of life issues. I mean, I think that a lot of people knew, a lot of the people who were doing bad things in our community, they knew that there was a lack of focus on some of these minor issues. And a lot of these minor issues are quality of life issues that could turn out to be bigger issues. And now we have a renewed focus on that. Again, we were dealing with something that was, as you all know, I mean, it was just an unprecedented challenge for society, and it presented some unique challenges in law enforcement, and it took law enforcement a couple of weeks or so in order to get our footing and to figure out exactly what all this meant and how we can do it. We've done that. We've made some adjustments. We're ready to get back to doing what we do. So going into the summer, you'll see that we'll have this renewed focus on some of these things, like the illegal ATVs and people that are doing some inappropriate activities in groups in some of our neighborhoods and on the corners and things like that we've been seeing. We'll take a renewed focus on that.
Okay. I mean, you're going to be also getting calls from residents who are going to be calling, probably the central number about issues, and sometimes they do get a response from whoever is taking that call that from their perspective seems dismissive of the concerns that they're expressing. And that's a concern I have also sometimes.
Well, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable when I hear that people feel that they're being dismissed or disrespected when they're calling for service. That's unacceptable. And whenever I get those reports, I make sure that those things are addressed. And so you can let your constituents know that when that happens, I need to hear about it so I can make sure that we have the appropriate corrective action.
Thanks. I just want to make clear, we appreciate everything that you're doing, that that the APT, the officers are doing out on the street, no complaints, but we're all in this unusual situation right now where there's a lot of frustration that builds up.
Hi, Chief.
Hi, Kathy.
Again, thank you for all that you're doing. And when you talk about officers making arrests and having the proper PPE, it's hard to imagine that they're still keeping safe. How can you arrest somebody and still maintain distance? So I'm really concerned about the officers' health and safety. So I'm sure that's a huge issue for everybody there. But thank you for what you're doing to tackle that. I share Richard's concerns about the fact that the class is only 30. And can you remind us how soon those officers will be out on the street?
6 months. 6 months.
Oh, so we won't have, okay. The other thing I wanted to talk about is I'm very concerned that programming for our teenagers, how we have that wonderful summer youth program where they get some money in their pocket. There's going to be more kids out on the street, and that's going to be a huge issue as well, and more problems as a result. And I'm wondering, have there been conversations about that and how the police will handle that? Because our officers are so important out there on the street, the beat officers in particular, in dealing with our youth. We're also going to have we won't be having those events, I assume, in neighborhoods that have been very popular and have really done so much to improve relations between the community, the youth, and our police. So if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, and Kathy, that is a huge concern for us in the police department, because we know that a huge crime suppressant is having a very active recreation department, a viable recreation department to provide an outlet for our youth during the summer months. And so it concerns us greatly when we hear that the likelihood that there'll be some programming that may be eliminated in regards to that. But we're seeing this happen, and we're already making some plans to at least mitigate some of the challenges that we foresee with this. And first thing, I've been in constant contact with Jonathan Jones, and our recreation director, and despite the possibility that he may not have the resources and staffing potentially that he may need to do what he needs to do, we still have some ideas on with the skeleton crew that if that is what happens, that we can still do some things in our neighborhoods. And we're talking about some innovative things where we can work together with our existing staffs during the summer to do some things. And so, we'll talk more about that. Jonathan and I still have some more conversations yet to talk about, but there's some exciting and innovative things that we can do with that. And, we have a very viable and active PAL program that's still doing things during the summer months. And, so we're going to continue to support that and see if there's some ways that we can even expand the impact of our PAL program. I know right now we're doing some things with the county in terms of expanding some of the offerings to our youth. And so we're going to look for some other collaborations like that, both with public and private sector partnerships. Library is another source, so we'll be getting with Scott and talking about some things that we can do. And our schools, obviously, what kind of resources do our schools have? I'm in constant contact with Superintendent Adams about youth-oriented type things that we can do in our communities, particularly during the summer months. And so that dialogue will continue at that level. And in our resources officers that we have in our school, in our other officers that are working in our communities, we're going to have those officers even more active than they have been in the past, with a renewed focus on what can we do to engage more with our youth, especially if there's this void. So huge challenge. And we'll work our way through it because there's some unique challenges that we have to deal with this. But I think we have a good team in place. I think we have a plan for we've got some very, very engaged people at all levels of this community that want to work with us.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. O'Shea?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, good, good. I'm trying to dial in using my regular computer so I could see more of the gallery, and I discovered that I don't have a camera hooked up on my regular computer, so I apologize. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, evening. One of the questions that has come up, I got a constituent complaint, and a couple of people have expressed concerns in my neighborhood about people not wearing masks around the neighborhood. We have this corridor of New Scotland Avenue that there's a lot of walkers on. But more importantly, a constituent complained about, on his particular block, a tendency for neighbors to engage in social activities out on the sidewalk without social distancing, without staying 6 feet apart or wearing masks. And also some children on the block, and I myself have seen some children on this particular block and a couple other places playing together, not wearing masks. And certainly in one case, I'm certain that it's a couple different families, so it's not a single family with kids in the ranges of about 7 to about 14 playing together. Frankly, I love seeing it on the one hand. On the other hand, they're not wearing masks. So a constituent complained, and I asked the city, included you, our neighborhood engagement officer, Mr. Gallen, what is the city's policy with regard to the police department role and the guidance that we are providing to neighborhood residents in that kind of situation. I haven't really gotten a response to that. So I'm wondering, what is the policy with regard to situations like that? Are neighborhood engagement officers supposed to be engaging people when they hear, walking down the block or driving down the block, and what are they supposed to be doing?
Our policy in our position with this is education and awareness. Obviously it's an executive order from the governor, and there are some enforcement mechanisms with that. There's some mixed messages in terms of the enforceability. You've got a perspective at the state level. You've got a slightly different perspective at the district attorney's level, and you have an even slightly different perspective at the local level with our corporate counsel. And so it makes it difficult, and it puts police officers in awkward positions. And also we're very reluctant to engage in activities that would cause some long-lasting discontent and fracturing of relationships with members of our community after this whole thing passes. So yes, officers, if we get calls like that, they respond, and they advise the individuals who are non-compliant or who are in violation that what the law is and what the expectations are, and we try to educate them, make them aware of why it's important to exercise social distancing and use face coverings. And we're even now having a practice where our officers are even taking out extra masks, the surgical mask, to give out to people. And I mentioned this, I think last night, There's been some times when people just simply forget, I think, and they're out and they're at the grocery store or they're out walking. They forgot to bring their face coverings, and it's not that they're being defiant. It's just they forgot and they just decided, okay, yeah, I don't feel like going back home. And so there may be an opportunity for us in cases like that to offer some education and awareness, and then as in a very respectful way, offer the face coverings for those who may have simply forgot it. And what we're seeing is that people are receptive to that. We used that strategy during the a couple of weeks ago when we had the demonstrations at the Capitol, and there were a number of people who didn't have face coverings, they weren't social distancing, and there were calls for the police department to take this enforcement action, and we should arrest people and do all these sorts of things. And we decided it was a much better strategy under the circumstances to educate and make people aware, and then provide this PPE to those people under those circumstances. So Judy, I think it's we're very, very careful about fracturing some things that have been built in this community by going in with this hardcore approach of issuing citations or arresting people in these circumstances because they don't have face coverings or they may be social distancing. We know the importance. We know what the consequences could be for non-compliance from an overall public health standpoint, but we're weighing those sorts of things with some potential long-lasting damage to police community relations as well.
So that makes sense to me. But I'm wondering if the neighborhood engagement officers are aware of the policy with regard to that also applying in a neighborhood situation, because the impression I got was the neighborhood engagement officer was awaiting guidance rather than actually engaging on that issue.
Well, it's my expectation that they know what the position of the police department is. I mean, there may be some circumstances where they don't. I'll make sure that they all do.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone, Mr. Flynn, you have anything? Or I can't see.
One question.
Okay.
Chief, thanks. I just have one question. Have you changed your protocol on arrests? Because I was talking to the fire department, and I guess they're changing their protocol when they come in contact with somebody who may have COVID. I mean, are you like documenting maybe obviously you're documenting the person gets arrested, but is there any change in protocol with an arrest?
Yeah, there are some changes in terms of procedure. And because first, when the call comes in to dispatch at the very outset, our dispatchers are required to ask a series of questions to give officers some indication of whether or not there's a heightened risk of a person either having it or someone that's nearby that may have it. And if there are some heightened risk indicators, then the officers at the very outset use some different procedures in terms of how they contact the people, the protective equipment that they use and stuff like that, as well as if it results in an arrest, what happens during the booking procedure, and then subsequent notifications to. And one thing that's changed a little bit, and I think this is for the better, is that now we're all of the different departments are communicating a lot more, because once there's, the police department knows that somebody is potentially at risk of COVID, we're communicating that with the fire department and with codes and with DGS and things like that. So there's a lot of internal communication that goes on with that as well.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So as a part of our original discussion points, and it'd probably be more appropriate to pose some of these questions to the fire department than you, but you're usually there first. The fire pits and the grills, the barbecue grills. You have a lot of folks that break them out and not necessarily in the backyard. I can use Clinton Avenue as an example, where you can ride up or down there, and out in front of the houses there are grills. And of course, with COVID and money being short for most people, a lot of people are just going to be doing staycations, so they'll be at their houses. Any plans on how you're going to deal with any of that?
Yeah, you know, this is the first I've been made aware of that issue, Kelly. And so what I'm going to do is I'll have to get back to you, and I'll get back to you before this week is out, because I want to confer with our officials in the fire department also, so we can make sure we have a unified response to this.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Mr. Conti, you trying to get
Yeah,
on?
if I can just follow up, because I mean, part of the issue is, you know, I have had some contact with Chief Gregory this year, because, you know, sort of becoming an incident. And they have some flyers out there, which says call 911, but which he said their advice really is to call central dispatch. Unless it's a real emergency, call 911. But I guess one of the issues, the APD usually gets some of these calls, and I did have a recent incident where someone did call because of a concern with a fire pit in the backyard that was going. And I guess the response was, well, we don't know anything about what's required or not required. And so I guess part of the question is, I mean, it is a fire department responsibility, but inevitably, you know, the APD does get those calls, and I'm wondering to what extent they're aware. And it's also a very sensitive issue. I mean, you don't want to tell people, no, you can't do this or that, especially with the weather, but you also want to make sure people are aware of the safety standards that they need to take to prevent potential, you know, fire and sometimes structures going up, et cetera. And it is a bigger issue, you know, downtown, in my area, other areas where you have more densely populated and dense neighborhoods. But I guess it's a question of, you know, the fire department's going to hopefully do some education so people understand and how to safely do it and where you're supposed to be. But as I say, inevitably, the APD gets those calls also. So to the extent that they're aware of what the requirements might be or the safety standards are, that would be really helpful. And however you do enforcement between APD and AFD, that's fine, but just, it's an awareness issue, I think, in part also. I don't know if that made any sense.
No, thank you. That's helpful. And I'll have this conversation with fire officials so we can have a unified response on this.
Okay, Mr. Ballerin.
I know we're talking about fire pits. Something that started to pop up again recently are fireworks. It was an issue around this time of the year. And it seems, I don't know if it's, well, I, to be honest with you, I didn't even realize Memorial Day was this weekend. So, you know, it seems like it's starting early, but maybe it's starting around the same time it always is starting. But it's always an issue. It's always been an issue. With it's not, you know, I get calls mainly when it's beyond 10 o'clock. You know, sometimes as late as midnight or even in the wee early morning. What are we doing to be able to address those type of issues and concerns? Because I feel like, and I know it's going to get worse as we get closer to July. And it's been an issue for some time now. So I guess, and I know we're short staffed, so it's like, well, we've got everything else going on, and now you're, you know, I'm not sure if it's that high of a priority, but I think it is a huge, I know it's a huge disturbance to residents when, you know, you're trying to rest and at 2 a.m. you hear a big firework, and it's not good, especially if anyone has ever experienced any type of criminal activity to be woken up to those type of noises.
Yeah, I think one thing that could be helpful for us is having some of these units that we'll have during this weekend and throughout the summer that they'll be working covertly. And because one of the challenges in enforcing this is by the time we get the call and we get there, they're gone. You know, we just see the aftermath of whatever happened. So, you know, obviously, you know, so education and awareness to the community is something that's key, you know, making sure, you know, having the residents in our communities call when they're seeing people setting up and putting these things off can be very, very helpful in terms of our response, getting there before they leave. And again, I think by having some extra units out on the street that are working covertly, who can you can get through, the neighborhoods and kind of see some of these things happening, and then take the appropriate enforcement action can be very, very helpful too. So this is definitely on our radar. We've gotten a lot of complaints about it so far this year. We understand that it starts to accelerate in this sort of activity in the weeks to come. And so we're aware of it, and we'll be taking the appropriate response with this one as well.
Okay, thank you, Chief. And regarding the beats, the point person is again Lieutenant McDade, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that members can get his contact info. And also, we briefly touched on the conversation yesterday regarding beats and when they were going to be reassigned or temporarily pulled out. We would like some kind of mechanism for the council member to be notified. That way, when they're dealing with the community and they're not making referrals to the beat officer, that is not available.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make sure we have a system in place whereby the council members know when there are these reassignments or anything else that impacts the staffing in the neighborhood engagement or beat officer program.
That would include if someone's out on sick leave or injury.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because I have one, officer, one beat who's been out since he's been assigned to the new beat that covers my area. Based on a question I asked last night, it sounds like he will be back in June. But because he seemed like to be the only one who was out on sick or injury leave right now. But and I guess the policy, when you do have those vacancies, sometimes they might be short-term, sometimes someone might be out on a long-term basis. Do you attempt to put someone in there on a temporary basis to fill that hole? Or is that something you just can't do because you don't have the staffing?
It's possible, but staffing certainly presents a challenge, because to fill that position, I have to take those bodies from our patrol division, which is woefully short right now. And they're incurring the bulk of those 56 vacancies that we have right now. They're coming from that area. And so to take another body adds to some of the stress in that area. So it's possible, but we've got to weigh what the impact is going to be overall, though.
Sure, understood.
Okay, I can't see everyone. Any other questions? If not, I will move on to the public comment. We only had one person for public comment, and I'll just read it. Michelle, if you throw it up on the screen. Okay, it's from Carol Mayer, public comments. And Mr. Flynn, this is from you, correct? One of your constituents? I am requesting to stop all outside burning in all of Albany County during this pandemic. A deadly respiratory virus is causing a high risk to the environment in general, but all of us to the environment in general, but all of us as individuals. My neighbors are frustrated by the long self-isolate and social distancing approaches needed to control this ongoing threat. All of this causes fear and anxiety. Our very limited coping choices are compromised by our need to keep our windows closed and not be able to enjoy our own yards because others are creating toxic fumes in the neighborhoods. These are unprecedented times. Please help us have a uniform and united approach to support each other. Thank you, Carol Mayer. So that was it for the public comment. If anyone has any other questions or comments, we will take them. Otherwise, entertain the motion to adjourn. Thank you, Chief, for providing us with the updates and the information, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
All right, thank you all. And if I don't see you all, have a wonderful holiday weekend.
Thank you, Chief.
Great, thank you.
You too.
Thank you, Chief.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Okay, second.
All in favor?
All in
Who
favor?
wait. Kelly, you
This-
second the motion?
No, I didn't say.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Frederick. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, guys.
Motion-
Take
we're
care,
adjourned.
everybody.
Okay.
Have
Bye-bye.
a good weekend, everybody. Stay safe.